the tradition that I'm most interested in and have been for years fascinated with is anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, but also another big thing that tempers the really revolutionary, that type of revolutionary spirit, is that I'm also a Nietzschean Buddhist.
Going back to the 2-on-1 example, how do you reconcile this and two people want to attack one person? Why should the one person be allowed to defend his life with lethal force if the two people have twice as much value of life as him?
It's not twice as much value, because remember I said life has infinite value. So
we can
2 times infinity is it's just infinity.
Well, okay, then I didn't take you at your word for that. I don't think you would agree that life has infinite value, though. No.
No, I think it definitely has infinite value.
Okay, let's say that I could kill one person to make every other person on the planet incredibly wealthy. Do you think that one person's life would be a worthwhile exchange?
Certainly not. I think I should probably start out by apologizing on last night if anything seemed weird. I thought about it afterwards, and I was like, we were kind of trying to go through the debate more of I guess in the same way you might talk about a boxing match or something. But it occurs to me that, you're a person and it must be weird to have somebody scrutinizing everything there. So, yeah, my bad on that.
Oh, I'm used to the internet kind of blood sports stuff. I don't think I care if people are scrutinizing me. I guess the only disappointment I had is it wasn't very much like subject matter. It seemed more to focus on like my name and my pizza, but...
Yeah. I mean, that was a very prominent thing about the debate. I think, and we can get into that if you want to. I guess I suppose since you're the one who invited me on here, do you have any questions for me or?
No, I guess I always get really frustrated because I feel like when I listen to people review my stuff, usually the criticisms made are not done in a very charitable way. And then I'm just curious sometimes if I can ask a few more questions, because I feel like sometimes people will, on the face of things, like immediately disagree with something. But then if I ask them like 1 or 2 more questions, it seems that we're either in full agreement or they just weren't thinking too much about the prior criticism. So that's basically all I'm curious about.
Okay, I mean, it's very likely. To make a point with the pizza thing, because a lot of people have latched onto that. And by the way, if someone can send me that Death Note meme you had with I'll take the pizza and eat it, that I saw on your stream last night because I watched your reaction, I would love to see that. That was freaking hilarious.
Sure.
Yeah, so anyway, as far as debates for me, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm a writer primarily, started in the theater, and lately I'm most famous for, one, I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler, so I wrote the first play ever about the Appalachian Trail, and then second, I'm the author behind this comic series, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, that started out as a play, and now it's got a Ringo nod, so... I'm coming at this very much from an artist's perspective, but I've been doing a lot of debates, and I'm, kind of an old school reply guy, like from even before Web 2.0. So this has been a habit and a hobby for me. Anyway, that's how I met Ben, because we've been doing a lot of stuff on modern day debate. Okay. I should also preface this, by the way, in that, longtime listener, first time caller, I actually owe you quite a bit. And, I could consider myself a fan, even though I have disagreed with a lot of things recently. But, I did a debate. I was challenged to a debate by J.F. Garipay. Okay. Oh, Jesus. Your early debates with him that I watched were critical for the research that I was doing, and I crushed him. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, nice job. That guy's, I don't know what he's been doing lately, but that dude is pretty insane. So.
Oh, yeah, he's out of his mind. Luckily, he's living in a crazy cabin somewhere up in Canada, and I think that's probably the best for him if he can just extract himself from the white nationalist communities built around himself. But,
Did he had anyway, another woman. Didn't he find somebody else to...
He did. There's a video I saw called JF Garipay, an intellectual beyond parody, and they kind of go into it. And I don't want to make this about him really, but the point being is that you did the really hard work of talking to some odious characters, and I feel like that was really important work that was really well done. So thank you for that, and that's had a personal impact on me.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Now, as far as the actual debate analysis, I think one of the reasons we focused on the pizza, and if you actually watch what I say, it was not so much to make negative assumptions about you. I actually said that I didn't know if it was being done on purpose or not, and I figured it was. You're a streamer, and from what I understand, streamers often eat on camera, so. But it was also a tactic that I had noticed other people use that I think were probably doing it on purpose. The two examples I gave were the Proud Boy and Donald Trump. So, we're trying to break down debates. That was less about attacking you for doing it, though it did seem to get into that a little while later with some of the other people in the debate. And more just pointing out that that is a tactic that people will use. And the whole point of it is to analyze debates and to analyze every part of it. So for me, at least, the way I see debates is they are performance art primarily. And as such, aspects of how your words are delivered to the audience and interpreted, it goes into everything from your cadence, your manner, your perceived stuff. Like every debate breaks down into kind of a triumvirate of ethos, logos, and pathos. And so I felt like the pizza was relevant in that it fed into ethos. But it might, I can see that I probably stated it too strongly, which is why I got a little pushback from Ben there. So, my bad.
Do you think that every single debate is equivalent in terms of its performativity?
No, I don't think it's equivalent. I would just say that performativity is a big part of it. Like if there's a radio debate, performativity is going to be less than if it's something like on YouTube or on television.
Wait, and also, real quick, just so we can understand, when you say performativity, what do you mean by that? Just so I can understand.
Basically, what I mean by it is that I guess sort of the tactics that are used to communicate things to the audience that are not necessarily the explicit, what's been explicitly said. Like, I'm trained as a playwright, so what I'm really interested in both as a playwright and as a writer is subtext. Mm-hmm. So I guess the performativity aspect of it would be the subtext that carries under the text of the debate, which I think you would say you seemed more interested in, which is more the logos part of that triumvirate.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are debates that I have where rhetoric is more explicit, where it's a more rhetorical style of debate. So if you are employing logic, it's for the sake of logos and it's for the sake of being persuasive. But I think that very rarely, I think there are conversations I have where it's genuinely just two people trying to figure out what each other means, and it's not necessarily approached as a debate where somebody's trying to own somebody else or beat somebody else. And I felt like Albert, for as much as I disagree, or Michael, I'm sorry, it's Michael Albert, right?
Yeah, it's Michael Albert. So
Michael Albert, yeah. For as much as I disagree with his style of everything, I don't know if I viewed that debate as a debate persuasive, argumentative, trying to own somebody or whatever. I felt like it was more just us trying to understand each other's positions. But
well, and that's something that I was surprised about because it said debate on your website, on the actual YouTube video from your channel that we used. So I guess we went into that with a more competitive framework in mind. And I was surprised to hear you because I was talking about one of the two big times I praised you early on was the fact that you had been willing to concede points early on, which I think is actually a really great tactic for people who are interested in competitive debating to see and to utilize. And I think you said something or maybe I just agreed with it genuinely. So,
yeah, I guess my problem is and I guess if you guys are literally going by a purely we're literally just going into this with the hardcore debater mentality, we're analyzing this as debaters or whatever, I guess that could make sense. But I guess with the framing that way, it makes it sound like the entire goal was to just basically own the other person, and then if I ever made a concession or agree with anything, I was doing it for a rhetorical point and not because we were actually having some genuine agreement on a topic.
I mean, I think you can do it for both in terms of a competitive debate. I believe when I go into the debates, whether it's unless I'm up against freaking neo-Nazi or something. I tend to be one who wants to have more communication and less like fireworks. I know people tend to really like the blood sports because most people seem attracted most to the pathos aspect of it. And, they're kind of there to see someone they identify with own someone they don't identify with and to get that like rush of dopamine. And I actually think debate can be higher than that. But I also think that, when you frame something as a debate, there's necessarily a competitive nature. And so there's a pull away from it. So, yeah, I think you genuinely agreed with him there. But like, if I'm thinking about it in terms of if you're doing a competitive debate, there's also pressure to win, quote unquote. So if you thought of that more as a discussion, I kind of apologize. I guess that may be mine. And, I can't speak for Ben, but I know he picked it because it literally was debate. It was labeled debate.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess it would be, I guess I feel like if that was the goal, you can find debates, especially more recently that I've done, that are going to exhibit far more. If we're looking at if we're looking at like an ethos, pathos, logos, and you want to break apart each of these as like effective rhetorical tools, you can find way better conversations of mine. Because I think that if we're even going to say that the conversation with Michael Albert was a debate, it's almost going to, I think, exclusively be logos related. Neither of us are going to be appealing to our characters much. Neither of us are going to be appealing to stories or anecdote much, as opposed to a conversation I've had with Nazis or other people where there are plenty of personal attacks, plenty of ad homs, plenty of storytelling, plenty of character building. But
yeah. Well, I mean, again, there's implicit and explicit. I don't think you can ever divorce like ethos, pathos, and logos from the conversation. And that's again kind of going back to the pizza thing. That even though that I don't think that you were intending to do it, that still will have that subconscious effect. It's like you didn't notice it, but your brain did. That kind of thing.
Sure.
But I would agree there probably are other debates that would be better, and maybe you can recommend some. I think with Ben, the reason he wanted to do it is he knows Michael Albert, he's interviewed him, so I think
I was gonna say, because if you were gonna go with it, I don't think I would believe that this was only chosen because it was a quote unquote debate. I think it was chosen heavily because of the political material involved as well.
Well, I mean Ben's a socialist, and so we're going to be most interested to look at debates surrounding socialism and just the kind of stuff he's into, and again, I can't speak for Ben. I know he wanted to possibly have you on to like once we were done to have a conversation with you about it as well. Again, that he mentioned something about that. I may be completely misrepresenting it. You'll need to talk to him to get that exactly.
Sure.
But yeah, and then maybe you guys can go over yourselves going over the debate, and we'll get like a wonderful Ouroboros of meta.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's sort of where the debate was and sort of where my head was at least going into it. I think the other thing that I wanted to bring up specifically related to that is probably like you brought up a good point when we were talking about it was the economics point where the two of you were talking, and you had said that you were thinking about it in terms of the paycheck that like Wilt Chamberlain was the original example. I think he used some other basketball player. And
we were arguing over what somebody's labor was worth. And Michael Albert was basically asking if the end product is worth exactly what the labor is worth, because he was trying to get at the idea that when you're buying somebody's labor, you're selling it as a final product or combined with the product for more than it is, which is obviously true. But I was looking at it from the perspective of just the value of the labor in and of itself. So I was missing his point there, and we were not connecting on that. And then I was a little disappointed because I don't think you guys brought that up at all. But
we kind of touched on it a little bit. I will agree we didn't go deep enough into it. I think you saw that a little more easily because you were in your head at that time and kind of remember it. What I saw when I saw it was there is usually, like, me and Ben partnered in a debate against two guys, Todd Lewis and Keith Preston recently. And in the debate, it was a debate on, like, can socialism innovate? Which was the easiest freaking thing to debate ever. But what we wound up getting into was Todd had based his entire attack on socialism on attacking the labor theory of value. And it struck me as the what you were talking about and what he was talking about seemed to be like it was going in the direction of subjective theory of value versus labor theory of value, which, for the record, I don't think it matters which theory is correct. As far as like socialist claims of exploitation are concerned. But I think that's what maybe threw me. I knew that you weren't communicating, and I think I may have actually written down in my notes, they're not communicating here. But I will tell you, you were probably right that we should have looked more into that and focused on the disconnect. Because, again, if we're thinking of this not as competition, but as an attempt at real communication, which is also another purpose of debate, I would say that the recognizing that would have been something that would have been really great to bring up. So I'm glad you pointed it out.
Gotcha.
But yeah. So, I mean, do you have any specific other questions about that with regard to like, stuff that I may have said or somebody else? I can mainly just speak for myself.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. When I was listening to it, the impression that I got was that it sounded like you guys were pretty hostile towards most of the points that I brought up, but I don't know. I guess it doesn't sound like you're too hostile towards them now, or?
I mean, so I went into that debate completely cold. I had not watched any of it at all. I know that you tend to have a decent amount of disdain for socialist arguments. And I've seen some good arguments out of you on that and some that I felt are kind of missing the point. So I expected to be pretty exasperated.
Do you think in terms of like arguments you think I've made that you think are missing the point? Curious what any of those
I'm
are.
trying to remember. I think one of the ones that, and again, I don't want to rehash every other debate, so I'm pulling this out of,
I don't expect you to have everything memorized that I've ever said.
Yeah. But I remember there was one when you debated my friend American Johnson and Luna on socialism. And Luna had made a point that, a lot of like third world kind of communist countries were poor because of imperialism and like, the CIA coming in and specifically messing them up. And I think you had responded to that. And this is a way I could have seen myself responding, to it if I was 18 or something, back before I had really learned a lot about socialism and about history, and kind of were like, well, if we fucked them up, like, then doesn't that prove our supremacy? And I think you're kind of missing the point there. So it's stuff like that I find a little frustrating.
Sure. For that conversation, what do you think the point was that I was making there?
I think the point that you were making is that a capitalist society this is the most, I guess, steelman-y I can think of it, is that a capitalist society is able to marshal the kind of resources that can be used to bring a communist society to its knees, and therefore the economic system is superior because of its ability to do that.
That's actually way closer than how most people, and it almost felt like kind of you were a little bit framing it. Like, I'm not trying to say that, and I never ever said, and I think if you've watched any more than the Twitter clip of that debate, like, I was never saying that, like, oh, well, capitalism is good because we destroy other countries, or capitalism is good because of imperialism. More so that if your economic system seems to constantly buckle to external forces, it seems like that's probably not a good argument in favor of your system. So, for instance, if you're saying, well, socialism would be good, but it loses to every other capitalist country, well, then it seems like that's probably a big problem. Like, that's something that probably is worth investigating, right? Like, it's not because if we become okay.
I won't say that that's not a big problem, and I think that is, in that sense, it is a valid point, and hence why I was doing my best to steelman it. But also, the issue being is it's like, so who's that guy who goes in and like does the sucker punch boxing and says he's like a champion?
I don't know anything about boxing, so I have no idea.
Oh, okay. So there's this guy, I can never remember his name when I try to remember it, but basically he's like he's a YouTuber, and he tries to like go in and to like boxing gyms and ask for like a normal sparring match. And then he just goes nuts on the person, and like he tried to fight like Floyd Mayweather Sr. and tried to sucker punch him and got
people are
annihilated.
saying Charlie Zelenoff. I don't know if that's it, but
yeah, Charlie Zelenoff. That's it. Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that the point that Luna was trying to make, and the counter argument to that is that the reason why capitalist systems are as powerful as they are today is because capitalism as a system is dominant over the globe, in much the same way that, you know, feudalism was dominant because the freaking king had an army and could keep people under control. It doesn't necessarily...
If that's the argument that she wanted to make, then she could make that argument. That would be phrased quite a bit differently than like our country is only lost because of American imperialism. But that's also a very weird argument to make because it's not like other socialist countries. If we're looking at like the USSR, for instance, especially wasn't imperialistic as well, right? It's not like Cuba or Bolivia. Like all of these countries, to some extent, everybody practices some form of imperialism. The idea that there's been like some intrinsic or some like a socialist society that's never looked outside itself to exploit some other country. That I don't know of any large empire that's ever existed like that.
Yeah, no, I would actually agree with you on that. You know, homo homini lupus. Though I do think that certain social structures can incentivize that more than others. Capitalism in particular. And also you got to keep in mind when you talk about imperialism and you're talking to like a Marx-Leninist like Luna, they have a different definition of imperialism than you might. And I don't actually agree with that definition of imperialism entirely. I think it's way too narrow. But again, this is, if people aren't communicating, this might be an example as to why.
Sure. So this is a huge frustration that I have when I go online, and I'm not going to dig through your Twitter history or anything because I don't know if you've said anything about me, but my feeling is that, I don't know if you've done this in particular, I would assume it though, is that a lot of people have looked at that debate clip, the 20, 30 seconds of that piece of shit American dipshit. I hate that guy, by the way. I don't know if you like him, but I fucking hate him. That's fine. But that guy, that clip that got posted out, is people are essentially trying to make the argument that I'm literally making a moralistic argument relating to exerting might over other countries. Destiny says that if somebody has more military than someone else, then they ought to dominate them, and that might equals right. I don't think that's a fair reading of anything I said in the conversation. I think even if you listen to that conversation, that's not what you're going to come away with. But a lot of people seem to make that argument. But now when I'm talking to you, who I believe you are significantly more left than most people that I talk to, even compared to other lefties, is my understanding of it. I think even you agree basically with everything that I've said, that like if your country is constantly whittling to external factors, that is like a legitimate argument against your system, or something that like demands some sort of like respect. Like you need to have a solution for that. I don't think that point was that crazy at all. Yeah, okay, but I get hammered for that Vietnam clip so much, and the framing is always that like Destiny makes fun of young lady who tragically was like put in front of him to debate by making fun of napalming her villages, blah blah blah. When like the reality was I had a debate with the American Johnson guy, and she came in and started screaming at me, and that like was and that was like part of that conversation. But yeah, I don't know, that those kinds of things that get clipped for me constantly are very 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 frustrating for me. And then maybe that can give a little bit more context of your guys' debate review when you bring up like the pizza thing. And I understand that none of these things are just like a one-off thing, but I get this framing of being like this hardcore vicious debate bro that is like bringing pizza with him to conversations with innocent lefties to try to like ambush them with superior pathos. Like I don't know, that kind of stuff is like very frustrating to me. But yeah no I can see why that would be frustrating. And you know, the thing is I've seen, you're very much a public figure, you're very famous, you got a lot of people following you, and you know, I had a little bit of fame as my writing has taken off, and I was like very active with Occupy Wall Street, been on TV a couple of times doing debates. I was actually going to debate Milo Yiannopoulos right before you did, but I stepped down because I didn't like the topic. Sure.
Yeah. But anyway, like I suppose I've got friends who are way more famous than me, that I see kind of inside their lives, and I see how people react to them online with like very little bits of information and huge extrapolations. And that is definitely really frustrating. And so I can see why you might have felt the way that you did. I did think that like a couple of times, like within the debate, and again, you know, must be weird, but like within the debate, you also seem to misunderstand a lot of the arguments that we were making. and like a few times, you kind of assumed bad faith on stuff.
I'm curious, what arguments do you think I was making bad assumptions about? I feel like I was understanding all three sides of this. My side, Michael's side, and then I feel like your guys' criticisms for the most part. But if you think there's something I misunderstood, I'm curious.
Yeah. There was one. This is. I don't remember the exact words of this one or exactly how you reacted, but it had to do with. I think we were talking around that point about viewing a corporation as being as having an internal planning and using bringing that out to a country. And which is somewhat valid. And,
so this is just, I hate this argument so much. So the problem with central planning, if we want to talk about central planning and the calculation problem specifically, the problem is that it's very, very, very hard to decide by committee, or to decide more specifically, absent market forces, how to choose which goods or services are being produced in a society. So when somebody appeals to the internal market of a corporation that's still externally relying on price signals to determine production, it's kind of a frustrating way to pretend that you've solved that problem and say corporations do it. And it's okay, sure. They might do it internally, but they're still relying externally on price signals to figure out, those calculations.
Sure. But I think there's a bit of a nirvana fallacy there, in the sense that even in the most hardcore socialist system, I think that you can imagine, there would still be some element of market forces, because markets are something that humans just do. Not
in Michael Albert's system though, in particular to paraeconomics, right?
I mean, to tell you the truth, as much as I know about Michael Albert's system, I have not read enough into him to really make that hardcore assumption. But what I can say is that even there's the system that it may exist in Albert's head, but that's not going to be that system in reality. Whatever we imagine can't exist exactly as we imagine it within physical reality, because nothing is perfect. So,
I mean, I can understand that. I don't think it's fair to call what is arguably one of the largest criticisms of centrally planned economies, to call that just a nirvana fallacy. I don't think that's fair.
I don't think I would say to use that criticism to dismiss would be a nirvana fallacy.
Well, I would dismiss centrally planned economies that don't have any solution to the calculation problem, right? I think.
Well. Yeah, so I should preface this with, I am not the kind of leftist who favors a centrally planned economy.
Gotcha. So then you would still be okay with market forces?
I mean, yeah, as long as they're, I hate to go to the store, so I have a kind of a visceral dislike for market forces, but I recognize that, that some people really like them, and it's something that we do. Yeah, I mean, as far as I am, you can kind of go for central planning within society, but that sort of requires an authoritarian state, and I am much more sympathetic to the anarchist, classical anarchist positions than authoritarian socialist positions.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm just trying to clarify a lot. I'm sorry. So I did a lot of reading for Michael Albert stuff before I debated him, because I wanted to understand the system. So my understanding is that central planning doesn't require authoritarianism. So I think the way that Michael Albert wanted to do it was, he was saying that, and we might actually get to this in part 2 of our conversation. I know you guys haven't gotten that far yet, but Michael Albert was saying that there would be committees basically in neighborhoods, and that every year a committee, you would all submit your request for what you would need. At the beginning of the year, and then that's how you would determine which goods or services would be produced in a given year. So that type of democratic planning can be done. That's not authoritarian. That's still quote unquote centrally planned, or you're not relying on market forces at least.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really consider that centrally planned, because if you're doing it on the community level, yeah, it's centrally planned for that community. But all those communities are still, communicating with every other community. So even that is a little more democratic than usually what people are thinking of when they're thinking about a centrally planned economy. And you hear the ANCAPs come up with, they'll say, calculation problem, that actually ends the conversation. I do think that there is a strength that capitalist markets have over it's kind of Soviet-style centrally planned economy, and that strength specifically is that they are tapping into, in a very imperfect way, they are tapping into something that has the backing of evolution, which is synergy, where things come together and market forces are kind of artificial intelligence that can help us make important economic decisions in a way the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. So I think that's a big point in favor of market-based economics. The problem with market-based economics is that markets are inherently biased towards previous actors within the market. And they have a number of blind spots. The biggest one, and I think just with particularly like market capitalist system, being that profits for an investor class are incentivized over absolutely everything else, which can cause huge problems, which you can see, for instance, in the United States response to COVID.
Well, I mean, I would argue that in the United States response to COVID, I think you can see, this is why I like to divorce, and I don't know if you guys criticize this heavily. This is why I like to, oh no, I think you guys did. This is why I like to heavily divorce my economic systems from like pure moral statements, because I think that economic systems are tools that can be used to like deal really good results or really bad results. And I feel like the COVID response.
I wouldn't disagree.
You what?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Okay, so I would say like the COVID thing in the United States, I think is a really good example of both ends of that. That prior to any proper incentivization from the government, like we had a really bad time getting out tests, we had a really poor response just in all manner in terms of like dealing with our what was a public health crisis in the beginning, right? And it didn't seem like capitalism or whatever was helping at all with that. But it seemed like afterwards, especially with the Warp Speed program or whatever, the promising to purchase a ton of vaccines from companies if they manufacture them. It seems like afterwards, it seems like the United States is doing incredibly well when it comes to the manufacturing and distribution of vaccines, which I would argue is like...
We have the infrastructure to do that, so yeah.
Well, but the infrastructure, which is, what's another word for infrastructure, right? It's capital, right? A lot of that exists because of the massive investment of other like private individuals and private parties and private firms that are working like for profit. Like, so I feel like it can be levied either way. Like, yeah, there are definitely times where it can be destructive, and there are definitely bad things about the system or ways that it can be used sometimes. But I don't think that it's like wholly bad.
I definitely don't think it's wholly bad. I think it's very bad, and we should be moving past it as quickly as possible. But at the same time, no. The very fact that capitalism has remained the dominant global system and has proven so resilient, much longer than I think most of the people who were predicting its demise in Marx's day, including Marx, thought, is kind of a testament to the system's ability to adapt and to serve human needs. That said, there are still some really, really major problems. Like, the United States was great at, and of course, you could consider Operation Warp Speed a centrally planned, quote unquote, response to a market failure. So the government is the one coming in and providing this particular incentive because the market does not provide that incentive to these companies.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I would wholly disagree with that. So I would say that like government incentives are trying to basically distort market signals to get markets to function in different ways. I wouldn't consider that to be centrally planned. I would consider that to be a way to get like, so like for instance, like cap and trade. I wouldn't consider that to be central planning. I would consider that to be like altering market signals to make other types of behavior in a market like more advantageous. But I don't think that's centrally planned at all. Like, it's not like the government was taking over these corporations and like expropriating them and then doing the manufacturing, or it's not like the government was just telling a corporation to do something in a certain way. Like, they were still relying on markets to do it. They just provided different incentives to kind of guide those markets along.
I think the issue here is that we're thinking of this in terms of like all or nothing as opposed to a gradient. I think anytime you take human intelligence and use the power of the state to try to distort or overrule what a market wants to do, that you're appealing to the same kind of tendency that I would say, I guess, central planning, Soviet-style central planning, is a extreme form of. So, like if you listen to some Marx-Leninists, they'll talk about how they want to do away with the irrationality of markets and like replace it with human intelligence. They want to take direct control of the economy, and that's an intuitive idea. But again, I think it has some very serious drawbacks. So again, I would say that is maybe if it's not central planning, and I wouldn't actually go as far as to say it, I would say it has elements of central planning. But my point about COVID was not really about the production of the vaccine. It was about our inability to meaningfully lock down, even though it would have unquestionably saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and it also would have been better for the economy in the long run. A good example of this, actually. Okay, great.
But I don't think that had anything to do with capitalism, though, right? South Korea is a super capitalist country, but they seem to lock down and do everything just fine. I think New Zealand is capitalist. Australia is capitalist. These are all capitalist countries that
sure. And we had a unique failure of leadership on top of everything else, and I think that's why we did very, very poorly compared to pretty much every other country in the world, at least at a similar level of development. But what I might point to actually is Vietnam. Vietnam had, I think, last I checked, and it may have changed, a total of 35 deaths from COVID total, and also a loss of, I think they only had something like 1,500 cases, period. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but their economy, which is, somewhat market-driven, but still, has heavily socialistic elements to it, mm-hmm. Their economy grew all 4 quarters as well. So they were able to basically, this wasn't like a win-lose situation where they traded their economy to protect their citizens. They were able to protect their citizens and protect their economy specifically because they were not a wholly capitalist system. The issue with capitalism as an economic system is that it relies on constant investment and reinvestment of capital in a speculative kind of manner. And whenever something happens to stop this, when the market doesn't grow, when we don't see an overall larger return than what we previously had, this class of capitalists that basically has the lifeblood of our system take it and retreat back to their bunkers and their gated communities, and we have a recession or a crash. So one of the big criticisms of capitalism is that it's an inherently unstable system, and so what will happen is that even though we have every ability, because we could have easily done everything that Vietnam did to lock down and more and better, because we have so much more capability and we have so much more capital, so much more technology, we still didn't. And part of that was a failure of leadership, but another really big part of it was the fact that when you act against the interests of profit within capital, that causes an economic crash. And when that causes an economic crash, that causes the people in power within that society to be voted out of office, usually. So our institutions are incentivized to act against our own long-term interests, both in terms of economic and in terms of humanitarian, because everything is subsumed to the need to constantly generate profit. It's not like an evil person is making this happen. It's just that that's how the machine works, and I would like to fix that aspect of the machine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that under a different leader, I think it would have been way different. I seem to point to leadership a lot. I guess my big problem is that we both acknowledge that capitalism has a bunch of positive aspects to it. And we both acknowledge that there are times when capitalism can lead to very bad things. But it feels like with good leadership, a lot of that can ideally be mitigated, and that you could continue to reap the advantages of the system. I guess my biggest issue is that it feels like so many people are so quick to demonize that system, but then any of the alternatives or solutions provided are either wholly inadequate, entirely theoretical, or just have no empirical foundation or reason to think they would work at all, is like the more frustrating part. And then you get screamed at or called a shill if you demand a little bit more evidence or a little bit more theory on the other side to see something that would actually possibly work.
Yeah. I mean, and that's perfectly reasonable, and I have encountered that particular version of very online leftist before. And you kind of got to understand, like, when you're talking to radicals, people become radicals for a reason. And it's usually because there's some major aspect of the society in which they feel alienated. Some aspect of the society is not serving them on a very, very fundamental need. And not all of those people have the knowledge, temperament, and capacity to even express that. And so it can take the form of like severe anger and frustration. Then, and also, don't forget, activists are kind of nuts. I spent, and by the way, I'm including myself in that group there because, I'm out of my mind. But, I spent a lot of time at Occupy Wall Street in New York. I was very active in the movement. I got kneed in the spine and thrown into a motorcycle by a cop. And I also interviewed Cecily McMillan when she was in Rikers Island, which is something I'm pretty proud about. But like while I was there and when I was down at the park, I heard a lot of dumb arguments, but I also heard a lot of really, really smart and really salient arguments. And a lot of the time what I saw was the press was pulled instantly to the worst aspects of the movement and were like, there was a point to bring people I don't know if you remember Ketchup. Who was on I think the Colbert Report with another guy. I think the other guy was Justin Wheaties. This was like 10 years ago, so you may not remember this at all.
Oh, I don't, but go ahead. That doesn't mean anything. I might have just missed it because I wasn't paying attention. Yeah.
Okay, so there was a girl called Ketchup, and I guarantee you one of the reasons they picked her to appear on the Colbert Report was that her name was Ketchup. And, when she came in, they were talking about kind of the zanier aspects of Occupy. And this was well before anybody was really taking trans issues seriously. So she was talking about how she was like a female-bodied person. And that was the nomenclature that the far left was using at the time. And like this was all brought out by like the media machine to mock her and to therefore attack, I guess if we're going to go back to the ethos, logos, pathos, to erode the ethos of not just her, but everyone involved in the movement. It was a very disturbing thing to see. So, when you're talking about when you're talking to like an angry socialist online, you don't know what's going on in that person's life. They might have just tried to get a house and been denied a loan, even though they were able to pay, way more than what the mortgage would have been. And that frustration can come out in a way that just doesn't always express itself very well. I try to be like the anarchist you can talk to, just because it's something that I think I'm fairly decent at and it's kind of fun. But I can recognize that there's a lot of people in radical circles who are hurting a lot and also maybe don't have the education or don't have the skill or the learned media training to actually express that.
Sure. So, I mean, I can be relatively sympathetic towards what you're saying, but I guess my problem is that right now I view a lot of these more radical left spaces as being harmful to any type of progressive movement in the United States. And that's, I think, the main problem that I have right now with, I guess, with that type of ideology. So a lot of these big quote unquote leftists online. I don't know how far left they have to be if you're considered leftists, but it's people like Jimmy Dore, people like Kyle Kalinske, people like Jamie or Brianna Joy Gray, or all of these people are harmful to these spaces on the left where they're detrimental to progress, or they try to be, where they push for harmful ideas that won't achieve any of their ends, where they purity test people outside of the left. And I don't know how much this is starting to make its way into real world politics, but that kind of stuff, I guess, frightens me, where you have real material conditions on the ground that are being damaged by people that are purity testing from, behind the gated communities they live in the suburbs with, them and all their white friends. That kind of stuff, really, really, really bothers me.
It bothers you. It's right that it bothers you because there is a lot of very toxic stuff about the community of the left, and it goes back to a lot of things. Some of it's COINTELPRO, and actual you wouldn't have believed some of the stuff I saw down at the park. I saw a person try to convince people. We just had like a big speech to everyone about how it was very important because we were going to do like a subway protest, and it was very important that they pay for their tickets and go through the thing and not jump the turnstiles, because New York really cracks down hard on that, and minor crimes can really seriously get you in trouble. And then immediately after that, there was a guy who was then yelling from the back, "Oh, jump the turnstiles, jump the turnstiles." And I kind of turned to him and I was like, "No, that's stupid." And he's like, "No, it's a great idea." And I'm like, "Okay, motherfucker, you jump the turnstile." And he's like, but I have a ticket. Mm-hmm. And I later saw that same guy at the Million Hoodies March for Trayvon Martin, and I watched him pull an egg out of his pocket and chuck it and hit somebody in the back of the head and try to start a fight. At the same time, like, one of the people who was with Occupy Wall Street at the park was later revealed to be an undercover NYPD detective. And we learned about him because he was infiltrating a biker gang and got swept up in it and wound up like physically attacking a family on the West Side Highway in like a traffic altercation. So, whenever you're dealing with any group of radicals, you've got people who are there because they're alienated from society. You've got actual infiltrators. You've also just got the general human element of jackasses, and then you've got people that are infiltrating either from law enforcement or from like some conservative group, or just nuts and hate the movement and want to destroy it. So
sure, I understand
there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, I understand that these things can happen, but like I'm very careful with my criticisms. Like I'm talking about like what widespread like popular figures that are popularly cited on the left, not just like random one-offs. Like I don't think it's any more fair to say that all of this radicalism comes from false agitators as it would be for the Capitol insurrectionists to blame Antifa for breaking in to the Capitol building.
Certainly. I mean, I don't think I don't think radicalism is necessarily bad. I think like when you have extreme problems, an extreme or radical solutions, it sometimes is the actual response. I usually, for this, I will cite like the Civil War, for instance. I don't think it was. I don't think the moderate decision of I think the moderate position at the time of the Civil War was to gradual emancipation of the slaves. I don't think that was the correct thing. I think the radical thing at the time to full emancipation now, even if it means war, is the more ethical, reasonable, and important choice to make. So I don't think like radicalism can be bad if it goes in a bad direction, but I wouldn't say that it's bad in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think that there are sometimes radicals can be good, but that's why I'm specifically talking about how I believe that the radicals on the left today seem to be more detrimental to their cause than anything else, and that's kind of the thing.
I mean, some of them. Yeah,
all of the big ones. There might be people like on the ground that aren't, but like all of the people that are insisting that, we need to get rid of Manchin because he's not $15 an hour, Medicare for all, like blah, blah, blah. Or all the people saying that like Bernie Sanders and AOC are sellouts. Like there's like a decent amount of this type of talk among leaders on the left. I'm not talking about just like random Twitter no names or just random people it feels like this is some prevailing thought in some of these circles sometimes, which I think is concerning and frustrating. Can be,
but also what you got to remember here is that this is a dialectic. So, and I will normally point to like Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X. Now, I really think that the only reason that Martin Luther King has been embraced and been lionized by history is because Malcolm X existed and made more extreme arguments that were not as palatable to society. They weren't as acceptable to the Overton window. I think if Martin Luther King, and you can see evidence of this in like the papers at the time and how they covered the civil rights movement. If Martin Luther King had just been there and Malcolm X had not been there making that radical argument, I think Martin Luther King would have been treated as though he were Malcolm X. So yes,
I think that's a really big jump. I don't know if we could just assume that. I feel like, and this is something that even holds true today. anytime you have a group of people that are like peacefully protesting and then cops come out and start beating the shit out of them, that seems to always bode well for public opinion regarding them and always bode poorly for like the institutions against them. I think that's like a pretty universal thing. And I think we even see that today with a lot of the BLM protests, that when there are protesters and they're getting attacked by cops, like national opinion of like those BLM marches seems to go way, way, way up. But then when the like protests start to get really violent and you start to see like buildings being destroyed or car dealerships on fire, whatever, then the opinions start to go in the other way. I think that's like a pretty universal thing. I don't know if I would say that if Malcolm X didn't exist, people would have vilified MLK a million times more. I don't know if that's something that it seems like it would be really hard to defend that statement.
Oh, hey, sorry. You cut out. I couldn't quite. I got up to where you were talking about protests getting violent.
I'm saying that anytime a protest is relatively peaceful and cops start cracking down on it, that seems to always bode well for public opinion relating to those protests. But when the protests get violent, it seems like public opinion starts to turn. I think that seems to be like a pretty universal thing that's like seen across like countries across the world throughout history. I don't know if I would say that just because Malcolm X existed, MLK was treated nicer. I think that's I think that'd be a really hard statement to prove.
I think it would be almost impossible. I think, but you can certainly see there to be merit in the statement, both because of like if you look at like there's a famous political cartoon that goes around where you've got Martin Luther King sitting there and the cartoonist had drawn a bunch of stuff burning and broken behind him, and he's saying, oh yeah, we plan to have another peaceful protest like tomorrow. So there were definitely elements of the press trying to cast Martin Luther King and his nonviolence as essentially a shield to cover up chaos goblins.
Yeah, for sure. But I think when you try to do that, I think if they're nonviolent, you look really bad. I think that's part of what goes into it, is that like people can see like if it's not violent, like people will take notice of that, and then you end up looking like the idiot there. But then once things start to become violent, well, now you're legitimizing a lot of the complaints of those people, and then the public opinion seems to turn against those particular people.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I think you're right. I will point out that one of the major reasons why Occupy Wall Street was a thing is that there was that viral video of the 3 young women being roped off. And the officer, I believe his name was Tony Baloney. Don't quote me on that, but allegedly. But I'm pretty sure it was him. You just watch him mace the 3 of them.
Yeah, with the red spray, whatever. I remember back when I was in school.
Yeah. Oh, dude, cops are. What was horrifying about what happened to me when I was arrested was like the freaking cop. Me and my buddy were walking down the middle of the street. I was wearing a Mitt Romney mask. He was wearing a Barack Obama mask because, we'd linked hands, walked through the police line. And when we were pushed over to the side, I remember like at first this white shirt comes up and starts just kind of shooing us over to the side. And I'm like, I feel my foot hit the sidewalk, and I'm just thinking, man, that was some great policing. Like we were kind of thinking we wanted like a viral video of like, the presidents being beaten and arrested by the NYPD, because that would be funny. But like I hit my foot hit the thing, and I'm like, this is some great policing. Then all of a sudden, this ginormous sergeant comes charging down, spins me around like freaking martial arts knee, smashes me in the spine, throws me into a line of motorcycles. And I remember I'm down there like with a mask like halfway on my face, and I hear the cops saying, stop resisting. And I'm like, okay, I'm not resisting at all. Like, because I'm not an idiot. I'm ragdoll. I know if I resisted, then they'd accuse me of assaulting a police officer. And so like in that moment, I kind of said through the mask, like, I'm not resisting, asshole. Now put the goddamn cuffs on me. And, they did. And I spent a couple hours in jail. Actually met, when I was going in, there was a priest, Father Paul, who had marched with Martin Luther King, who was coming out at the exact same time. He had been arrested with Occupy Faith. So like, and I suppose that's kind of what I'm getting at with cops a lot of the time is like, they can be incredibly brutal and incredibly creepy in how they deal with you. Not all of them. There's some police officers I really, really like. A great example is Captain Ray Lewis, who's a former Philadelphia police captain who was arrested with us at Occupy. And he and I are very good friends. And he's got some interesting opinions on policing. But like, I think violence is usually a bad idea, but also like knowing how violence can sometimes start and how and why it happens, like it's difficult for me to, I suppose, 100% wag my finger and blanket, denounce all of it, because on one hand, yeah, there's moral implications with regard to it. There's also, optics implications. But, at the same time, people do need to be able to defend themselves. And certain times, like especially symbolic violence, like property destruction, for instance, to a certain extent, can be very important to draw national attention to a problem that absolutely needs to be solved. And I think a great example of that is Black Lives Matter, because I was at the very first Black Lives Matter march ever in New York City. And it was an entirely peaceful march. But I remember just how incredibly hostile to BLM the whole society was. And it really wasn't until just a few years ago that public opinion turned around on it. And a lot of that has to do with the media. A lot of it has to do with BLM just being really good at making their case. But I don't know, riots are always a morally dubious thing. But I tend to divert to Martin Luther King with the riot. A riot is the shout of the unheard.
But we can still condemn riots, right? Like Martin Luther King condemned riots, unequivocally,
yeah.
right?
I think we can. Again, it's a very complicated situation. In much the same way, like what I would. So, imagine, for instance, you've got a woman in a home dying of a gas leak. Obviously, it's moral to break the window in order to save her life from the gas leak. So when you extrapolate that out, if you've got people who are dying from structural violence, either physical structural violence, as in a plague of police violence against their community, or structural violence in the form of being denied necessary food, medicine, housing to live full, productive lives. I'm personally fine with breaking a window if that draws attention and helps people fix the problem.
Yeah, but my problem is that that doesn't seem to happen. It doesn't help anybody. It just hurts the entire movement. It sets everybody against it, and then it makes everything worse off. That's my biggest problem with it, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that's a simplistic way to look at it, but I will agree that it does alienate a certain group of people, and we can even see that.
Well, do we feel like burning down any car dealerships furthered BLM's interests? Where people all of the polling started to turn the other way, especially in the closely affected communities. We even saw that after the MLK riots, that polling started to turn against those types of more progressive or civil rights era causes. Even for the next presidential election, people were pointing towards those MLK riots as potentially being the turning point. So I don't know. I don't know I don't know what nuanced point of view I could take where I'd be like, oh yeah, well sometimes rioting against private property is good. It seems like it's always something that's bad and should probably be condemned. Yeah. Or it's not effective, I would say.
I would say that it is. I would say that and I would probably equate this with burning an effigy. One of the key things that's really important, and one of the reasons why I wanted to actually talk with you and debate you on Modern Day Debate about your moral system, though we can debate about anything that you want. I'm actually really enjoying this conversation, by the way, is one of the core suppositions that I tend to have about morality is that people are always more important than property, with one caveat, and that is if that property is actively keeping someone else alive. So, for instance, you get pissed off, you throw a trash can through a Starbucks window for whatever, or that happens by someone acting out during a larger protest movement. If that act gets people to pay more attention to the protest as opposed to ignoring it, and if what the protest is seeking to make clear is then suddenly the problem is identified and the problem is solved, I think, as much as it sucks that the Starbucks window got broken, I think, the benefit outweighs the negative consequences.
Do you think that the people? Do you think that the people? Do you think that the people that were losing their business during the LA riots? So the famous example is the Korean communities and the Asian communities, where the police officers basically just left. They were like, "Oh, good luck. Figure it out on your own." Do you think that those people should have just stepped away and they should have just let the riots burn and they should have just lost their businesses?
No, certainly not.
Why not then? What's the difference there?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think you should step aside from, protecting what's yours and what you have. If rioters come to my house, with an intent to, the very first thing I'm going to do is to try to talk to them, to identify with them and to let them know.
Okay, but let's be more realistic. I don't know how much video footage you've seen of the LA riots. I don't know if they would have been in a position to have like a cordial community. Like, riots are a very messy, violent thing. It's not like people are walking around, with maps and their phones out. It's like, okay, well, let's go ahead and tactically engage with this business in order to maximize our effectiveness. Like, they're usually far more visceral than that, right? So I don't know if
they can be. Like, what I would say with regard to that is, things can get messy, and there are situations in which talking simply won't work, and then self-defense becomes justified.
Well, but it's not self-defense, it's defense of property, right? So let's say, assuming during the LA riots, people were mad as fuck. There was a lot of damage. I think, what was it, 50, 40 people killed? I'd have to look at exactly. I don't know, 63 people killed. I don't know if those Korean people, would you have obligated them, like with arsonists or people coming to their property, that they should have tried to step out and have a conversation and risk life and limb to do that without knowing what their intentions were when people were actively being killed in these riots? Or
I would say morally they are justified in using force to protect their property, but they are not justified in taking a life.
So what does that force look like? Or do the old Korean ladies need to go out with baseball bats and try to fight hand to hand, or?
I mean, to tell you the truth, honestly, I think people are going to be very reluctant to attack old ladies when they know it's an old lady.
Well,
and in
so
fact,
we have got over 60 people were killed during those riots. So I don't know, would you just send her out and you hope that they're going to feel reluctance, or because
no,
or go ahead.
I'm not. What am I? Am I her? Am I like her commander? Like,
well, yeah, you're the one giving them. You're giving the moral prescriptions here, right? So we're saying, like, how ought we expect people universally to act in a society given a certain situation? So my position is, I wouldn't expect like an elderly person or a small person to go out and try to hand-to-hand combat to protect like their property. I would never levy that expectation, not against somebody that's being aggressive.
No, but I think you can appeal to someone on a human level. I mean, again, what's very important to understand, like when it comes to riots and protests that get out of hand, is these are still people. They're not chaos goblins. A good example I can actually give you is from my own experience with Occupy. On
Occupy was nowhere near as violent as the LA riots. Was anybody killed?
No,
in
certainly
Occupy?
not.
Okay, yeah. So I don't think it's the same type of comparison. And we can go.
I mean,
we can go to a
comparison
more
in the sense of what I would say. I'm not comparing it for level of violence. What I'm comparing it to is when a crowd is thinking in kind of, I guess, sort of mob mentality. And there's a lot of problems with the concept of mob mentality, but I'm just going to use that because that's what we all understand. There was a march that we went on that I remember, where we went down and around and we came up against a wall, and it was just a random wall that had been set up in New York, and it had nothing to do with what we were trying to do, but people got confused, or maybe there was some agitation, or maybe just some idiot. And everybody started pulling on the wall and like trying to pull it down, because suddenly people were like, oh, what? Oh, we're pulling down this wall now? Okay, let's go do this. And what was able to be used at that time was, we had what's called the people's mic, where you would yell mic check 3 times, and then everybody would echo your words. And that tactic was because the police would not allow organizers to use bullhorns. If you tried to use a bullhorn, you'd get arrested. So we did that by amplifying everybody with our voices. And the person was able to communicate to the crowd, this wall is irrelevant. There is no reason to do this. And so the crowd immediately changed their tactics, and we continued our march, and things remained peaceful.
Okay, that's great for that particular instance. But again, like if we're pointing towards like riots that are way more violent than that, like how I guess how do you, what I'm asking is how do you feel comfortable compelling a more vulnerable member of society to go out and risk life and limb to a potential attacker? Like, I don't understand.
Again, I'm not compelling anyone. I'm simply talking about what I feel is the most moral response. I'm not even necessarily saying that there should be legal consequences.
Well, but we're saying there should be. So when I say compel, I mean like a moral compulsion. Like you're saying, like you ought to act in a particular way. So to be clear, so my position is that if you are a vulnerable person and you don't have the ability to go out and like hand-to-hand fight somebody, but somebody's coming to destroy your business, I think you have a right to defend that business. I think you have a moral right to defend that business. But I think your position is that that's not the case. That you should be obligated to engage in some other form of.
Oh, I mean, there are ways to defend the business that don't involve killing anyone.
Sure. So that's what I'm asking. Like how? Like what are their alternatives there besides firearms?
Well, the major one that I gave to you is talking to them.
Okay, but let's say that we're not at the Occupy Wall Street riots where people are like, it's a bunch of like a lot of college kids that are just kind of chilling marching. Let's say it's the LA riots where people are legitimately, absolutely fucking enraged, and the tension and the atmosphere around these are far different.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is I didn't live through the LA riots. I think you're younger than me, so I don't think you did either. So I have not experienced what that is exactly on the ground. But what I can compare it to is the time I was mugged.
Okay, I understand. I understand that you've experienced a lot, but I'm just like you could acknowledge that there are different levels of intensity around like different types of riots, right?
Sure.
So yeah. So when riots are becoming incredibly intense, so for instance at the Capitol building, do you think that those people, the officers inside, had the right to shoot the protester that was trying to come through the door?
Oh, that. Yes, I think that was justified. And I mean, but that particular crowd was. I mean, there was a guy with the zip ties and stuff. I'm sure there were just idiots involved in that, but there was a hardcore group of people whose intent was to kill. I think.
Okay, so if you're in a massive riot where there are people running around with Molotov cocktails or with giant bricks or with like clearly their intention is to go and destroy some shit, like I think that these types of riots or these types of movements are probably a lot different. I don't want to say movements. These types of riots, these types of things are probably a lot different than like an Occupy Wall Street march, or an even better example. I think these were the largest protests in the world. Was the feminist march that happened? I think on Donald Trump's inauguration. Those were
the women's
peaceful,
march.
Right? Yeah, the women's march. The atmosphere around that, and if a riot had started, although I don't think any did, but if a riot had started, I would imagine a riot for the women's march is going to be look a lot different than like Kristallnacht or the or the Tulsa race riots, right? In the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and we should clarify also, just in case people don't know, you're referring to like the Tulsa race riots when the Black Wall Street was attacked.
Yeah, basically cops stepped aside, or in some cases helped a whole bunch of white people destroy what was the wealthiest block of black wealth in what may be the entire history of the United States. A lot of legal professionals, lawyers, a lot of black businessmen had set up here. It was the largest concentration of black wealth, at the very least at the time, in the entire United States, and it was destroyed. Like, do you think would those people have had a right to defend their property with?
Oh, absolutely.
Force? Okay.
Again, there's when I'm speaking about general moral principles, it's a little different than when you're actually in a self-defense situation.
Sure. So this is what I disagree with that. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for like broad moral principles that we can always appeal to. I don't think morality should change when you're in another situation. I disagree with that. And I think MLK would argue as much, that just because you're in a different type of situation, the morality doesn't suddenly change. Like you should still do your best to act in accordance with whatever moral principles you have, right? And we should encourage others to do the same. And then we're also looking for like the idea of like moral condemnation as well. Like we want to be able to say like, okay, well, this person acted in a way that isn't in accordance with moral principles, or this guy acted in a way that we would condemn, regardless of the situation. Like, I think those are the types of things, because it's easy to just say that like, well, because like, I guess my frustrating part is that, so I get condemned a lot for my position on defensive property, a lot, obviously, because of clips that have been taken for whatever reason, regardless. But when I talk to people, it seems like I can never get, like, the frustrating thing is it feels like I'm criticized a lot because I'm the only one that's willing to stake out an actual moral position on this topic, and everybody else will be like, well, you know, sometimes maybe things happen and, you know, different things, and maybe sometimes, like, nobody's actually willing to tell me, like, okay, well, what principles do you appeal to? And then the thing that frustrates me even further is that oftentimes riots have been used in America and in other countries historically to destroy a large amount of minority property. And the Tulsa race riots are the most famous example of that, but it's definitely not the only one. Throughout especially around the civil rights era, there were lots of riots against black property where black property was destroyed. And I know that it's easy when we talk about white people to say, like, oh, well, just let your business get shit on, LOL, get fucked, like it's part of the greater movement. But I don't think we would make those same compulsions of minorities who are losing businesses to racist white people to say, like, well, listen, it's just property, you know, like I would never value your property over somebody else's life. I think instead, I think that you become far more reasonable. And it's like, well, if these guys are aggressing on other people's property for no reason, and they're trying to destroy it, and they don't have any reason to do so, you know, maybe there are times where against an aggressor, it's okay to use lethal defense to protect what is rightfully yours. I don't think that's that crazy of a position to take.
You know, again, I don't think it's that crazy of a position. And this is, you know, again, maybe probably why we should do the debate on your moral system on Modern Day Debate if you want to, because it would be a good chance to make your case with regard to this. Because I would like to get into it, and I did before this, because I thought it might come up, I rewatched like the first third of that video of yours and made some notes. But I think there's a slight misunderstanding that you're making with regard to the nature of morality itself with people. And it's a mistake a lot of people make, I've noticed. But like the first thing when you were saying that, you know, consistent morals, you know, in all situations, I don't think that's physically possible. I do think that consistency is something we should strive for, but also any moral system is going to be flawed simply because it exists within reality, and everything within reality.
Sure. So I would be careful when I say this. So moral systems should be perfect, or else they're irrational, and then should be necessarily shunned. If you have a moral system that is imperfect or contains contradiction, it should be tossed. We should seek to resolve the contradiction. But there's a distinction between a moral system and a behavior. So like I would like to think, for instance, that I follow a perfect moral system, but my behavior is not perfect. There are times when I make mistakes. There are times when I do things that are wrong or bad. Like nobody lives up. That's why they're like ideals, right? Nobody lives up perfectly to any particular moral system. But that doesn't mean that a system in and of itself, you know, shouldn't be perfect. You know, mathematics should be perfectly logically systems, but you're still going to make a mistake sometimes when you do a calculation, right?
Right. But I mean, if you talk to people who study math at a high level, they'll tell you that math is imperfect.
No, I don't believe that's the case.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now, again, it's rare, but like math is a human construction.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying math is a human construction. It is a system that we created, and it has great utility for us, and we can use it to do a lot of amazing things. But the actual system itself cannot be perfect in the same way that, and I think in the same way with moral systems or economic systems, everything that exists within reality carries within itself its own negation, its own contradiction. That you will never find anything perfect under the sun. Even a system that you might imagine in your mind to be perfect, you will have made a mistake simply in imagining it.
Okay, and so to be clear, when I say something is perfect, so mathematics, for any understanding of math I've ever heard in my entire life, mathematics adhere to an internal, like logically consistent system. There is no form of, unless you get into really weird, like para-consistent logic or something crazy like that, most math systems will be like internally consistent. Like nobody discovers a mathematical contradiction and goes like, oh, you know, well, some math systems just have contradictions in them, LOL, and then move on from it. Like contradictions are meant to be solved and settled. Like they're not like, we don't accept any sort of...
I can tell you a friend of mine had that exact thing happen to him in college, where he went to a math professor. I forget exactly what it was that he got into, because I'm not a math guy. So there's probably better people to talk to about this. But he basically went to a professor and had like this equation or whatever he was working with, and was like basically like, I think I disproved math. And the professor like looked at it and kind of laughed a little bit. It was like, oh, I haven't seen, you know, that take on it before. But basically the professor explained to him again that mathematics as a system is very, very useful, but it is flawed, and there are flaws that can be found within it that, the issue is, however, is that these flaws happen very far out in the system, so it won't cause problems with, say, standard addition, multiplication, all that kind of stuff. We can still use math to figure out how to build things and shoot rockets into space and whatever.
Okay, let's
the actual theories themselves do break down. But you're going to want to talk like a math PhD about this, not me.
Sure. Okay. So I don't agree with that, but I'll grant you that. Even if I do grant you that, though, we don't just accept contradictions willy-nilly. If we were to accept a contradiction, it would be like a last resort, and it would be something we would seek to rectify or solve, right? So our moral systems, even if they aren't necessarily perfect, we would still hope that they would approach perfection. And if there were glaring contradictions, then we would try to solve these contradictions, right?
No, I agree with you entirely on that, and I think that should be the approach. The issue then being is that when you get into a portion where you've set up a moral system with specific principles, and you think that you can't deviate from those principles in every possible situation. And so basically, like, there seems to be two ways that people usually think about morality. And I think you'd agree with me on this. And you get people who are more consequentialist and people who are more deontological. So you talk to a libertarian, especially like an anarcho-capitalist, they're very deontological, rule-based. They'll come up to you and quote the NAP and then declare to you why it's actually okay to engage in cannibalism if the NAP is not violated. Now, that's ridiculous, but it's the kind of ridiculous stuff that will happen with it because of their philosophically weak moral system, because of its over-reliance on deontology.
I don't know if I'm comfortable enough to agree that deontology... Now, I consider myself to be a consequentialist, but I don't think I would be brave enough to say that deontology is weak. I'm not about to go argue against the conscience and say...
Yeah, no, their version of deontology is weak.
Okay.
I'm just throwing shade at ANCAPs because I've been arguing with them since like 2014.
Gotcha.
Somebody in your stream mentioned I did a debate against David D. Friedman, who's an awesome guy, by the way. But yeah, it's like I argued with ANCAP so long I eventually fought the final boss.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but like, so then you've also got like consequentialism, and I think if you take consequentialism and only consequentialism and you take it too far, you can also come to some similarly monstrous ideas. It was kind of what was brought up when the guy was talking about societies that only produce as maximum guns and butter. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, do you like comic books at all? Are you into? I swear this connects, but
not much, no.
Okay. Have you? Then I guess you haven't read Watchmen.
No.
Okay. So do you mind if I spoil it for you?
Go. I don't care about spoilers. Go for it.
Okay. So Alan Moore's Watchmen, it's held as not just one of the greatest graphic novels of all time, like one of the top 100 novels of all time, period. And the trick that Alan Moore does at the end is one of the reasons why people like it so much, in my opinion. Because you get to the end of Watchmen, and essentially what it does is it pits two human moral systems against each other, consequentialism and deontology. So Rorschach, who is, kind of like a crazy right-wing preacher, is pitted against Ozymandias, who is sort of your ultimate like liberal technocrat, who believes very much in consequentialist morality, whereas Rorschach literally has a line, never compromise, not even onto doomsday. The whole world is racing towards nuclear war. And so as a way to prevent the total destruction of the globe, Ozymandias basically engineers like a giant seemingly extraterrestrial attack that kills 1/3 the population of New York City. So like suddenly New York is 9 million people. So 1/3 of 9 million are suddenly dead. Okay. And the heroes confront him. But they also realize that he actually did save the world, because now the USSR and Russia or the USA and the USSR are standing down due to their belief in this non-existent extraterrestrial threat. And then, of course, you have Rorschach at the end, who's basically like, I'm not going to compromise. And he gets killed for his trouble in order to preserve Ozymandias' trick. and the main characters are sitting there and they don't know what to do. And ultimately they're stuck in indecision, and the other they just go off and have sex and move on with their lives. And Ozymandias gets away with what he did. Now, you look at that and you finish it and you're like, some people will be like, oh man, Rorschach was totally right. Ozymandias is, even if it would endanger the world, you need to expose that trick. And then other people would be like, no, it saved the world. Ozymandias, even though he did it through evil means, he saved many more people, so therefore he's a hero. And I got to tell you, the trick is it's forcing people to think in either deontological or consequentialist ways. And people tend to be emotionally one thing or the other. The answer to that question is punish Ozymandias, but keep his ruse in place. Because, again, when humans actually make real moral choices, we don't pull from consequentialism or deontology on their own. We pull from both. And we also pull from compassion and several other things. So an individual's and societal moral judgment is like a storm. It's a confluence of a bunch of different forces that come to what we consider a moral outcome. Or at least that's part of my sort of theory on morality. So, that's kind of what I've been getting at, like, through this whole thing. So I worry when someone cleaves too hard to principles or cleaves too hard to outcome. It's because of a fundamental misunderstanding of how morality works with regard to humans.
So the reason why I hold on very hardcore to consistent moral principles is because the problem is that when you become inconsistent, I don't actually believe that there is an inconsistency there. I think that what's actually happening is people are appealing to a deeper system that they either aren't aware of or they're not being honest about. That's my problem. So,
that's a possibility.
That would be my belief. So I would say, because it seems like sometimes if somebody gives me like a particular thing, it seems obvious that if I can think of an example to break their moral system, it doesn't seem to me that they're like just changing it this one time. Instead, what I'm thinking is this person probably doesn't believe this because I think that this person is actually appealing to a different moral system, and I'm going to ask them a few questions to kind of get to the root of that. So for instance, if I'm talking to somebody that eats meat and I say, well, what do you think about animals? Do you think that like we should be allowed to torture animals? And they're like, yeah, actually, I don't think anything's wrong with torturing animals. I think eating meat is fine. And then I go, okay, well, what if I want to torture your dog? The reason why I'm asking that isn't to just like make them trip up or whatever. It's because I think that they do believe that torturing some animals is wrong. They just aren't aware of that, or they're not enunciating that. So you ask some questions to figure out like, okay, well, hold on. I think that like pets should be protected, but farm animals shouldn't, right? And then once we've gotten down to a deeper principle, now it's like, okay, this is something that I think you're going to consistently follow. So to bring this back to the argument about riots, the reason why I'm uncomfortable with people just blanket saying like, well, no, hold on, property is always worth more than lives. It's like, well, really? It's very strange to me that lefties say that, and then they'll go on and they'll either praise Mao for killing landlords to take property, or one of the entire tenets or one of the central tenets of their beliefs is the proletariat rising up and seizing capital back from the bourgeois. And the only reason they do that is to improve their material conditions, right? So this is killing people for property, one form of property or another. Now, I'm not making a judgment on whether I think that's right or wrong. I just find it very odd that a bunch of leftists have come up against me saying that property is never worth life, when a central tenet of a lot of these, especially ML beliefs, is the revolution of the proletariat to capture back the capital from the bourgeoisie, oftentimes at the cost of life.
Mm-hmm. And that is a fundamental tension, I think, with any kind of revolutionary movement. I would say Marx did this better than Lenin did necessarily, because, when you're talking like with MLs, like Marx's whole thing when he did argue for revolution, but essentially he argued that a revolution of this kind was inevitable because of certain contradictions within the capitalist system, that capitalism itself would create its own reaction that would, and basically thinking of it in a very heavily determinist sort of way. Whereas, you've got with Lenin, and I'm no expert.
To be clear on this, I'm not using this to criticize like Lenin or Marx. I'm not criticizing those leftist ideologies. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily believe a leftist when they say property is never worth taking a person's life. I don't believe that, because I see lots of people make jokes about killing landlords. I see lots of people make jokes about guillotines for capitalists. And I don't believe, much the same when Nazis do these types of jokes, I don't believe that it's all just LOL irony humor. I think that there's a lot of underlying truth there. So I don't believe people when they say that, like, oh, I don't think it's ever worth it to kill a person for property. I don't think that's true at all. I think especially leftists are hyper aware of material conditions quite often. And I think that there are times where they'd say, well, the material conditions of a person could be so oppressed by another party that violence might be necessary, even if that comes at the cost of the life of the capitalist. So that's the only reason why I push people on consistent systems, is because it seems like we want to be able to make I don't want to say virtue signaling, but we want to be able to make a statement that optically seems defensible, like, oh, life is never worth a piece of property ever. But the entire ideology that some of these people follow, maybe you included, seems to betray that very notion. In fact, it's like a central part of said ideology that sometimes violence might be necessary in the recovering of capital from the bourgeois.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I definitely don't. Just like for the record, so I'm a class. But I'm a special snowflake. Don't try to classify me, man. But the tradition that I'm most interested in at the moment, and have been for years, fascinated with, is anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism. And I've got a screenplay that I wrote and a comic series coming out, like set in Spain during the 1930s. So that's kind of the philosophy of it that I'm really interested in. But also another big thing that tempers the really that type of revolutionary spirit is that I'm also a Nichiren Buddhist. And I have very particular beliefs with regard to, one, the use of violence, because violence does create negative karma. And that doesn't mean what most people think, but still it's something to keep in mind. If I don't believe you can kill your way to a better world.
So what do you do in terms of building a more egalitarian or equal or equitable society, I guess I'll say, when capitalists aren't willing to give up that power? How do you get it back from them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that needs to be done is that absolutely every effort needs to be made.
So let's just skip all of this, and let's be super charitable and understand my argument, right? So obviously you would exhaust all of other measures first. Obviously you would exhaust making agreements with them. Obviously, at some point, now, maybe you're like the only leftist in the world that doesn't believe this, but I hear enough leftists screeching that, liberals will go the route of fascism and blah, 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 blah. So a lot of leftists believe that liberals will need to be pushed with violence at some point to give up all of the capital that they've acquired. And I'm sure that even you would, to some extent, would realize that there is no amount of negotiation that's going to get every capitalist to part with their capital. So at some point, when violence becomes necessary, do you just drop it and say, like, oh, well, if they're willing to defend their stuff with violence, we have to give up and it's over? Or at some point do you say, well, the material conditions and the oppression of the proletariat that is necessitated by the existence of this capital class demands a violent response? Are you ever willing to say that?
I would never say that it demands a violent response, but I would say, if you're in that situation, the self-defense, it would be self-defense, because if material conditions are that bad that people are dying as a result of unable to access healthcare, unable to get medicine. I think to put this on an individual level, the sort of 6 stages of morality, the idea that is a person whose wife is dying from a curable disease, that the only druggist in town refuses to sell the cure for any price, is the man justified in either attacking him and taking it or stealing it from him in some way? Sure. I would say yes, because what you're doing is you're taking an action to save to save a life, even
if it's in kind of an indirect way, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think indirect violence against people is as bad as direct violence, because
or can be as bad, if I'm being charitably right. Not necessarily all the time, but it can be as bad for sure. And I would 1,000,000% agree with you. Right. So now I don't disagree with anything you've said. So in actuality, I actually 100,000,000% agree with every single thing you said. But I think that with the precepts you've laid out now, I think that you're a hop and a skip away from saying, if somebody is coming to destroy my business, I have the right to defend that with lethal force. My business might be the way that I provide for my family. My business might be the way that I put my children through schools. It might be the only way that
you see what you're doing right there.
What?
Well, my business is the way I provide for my family. It's the way I put my children through school. What's happening is that the right to defend it is not coming from the property itself, but what the property does for the family.
Of course.
Thus, yeah. So it's really a question of life versus life at that point.
Yeah, sure. But we've made that life part, that life for life, has gotten like, it's pretty abstract, right? Where we're not just saying, so at this point, it could be defending property for life, but the property is like a way to sustain life. But then at that point, I think you're pretty easily on board with like business owners in Kenosha or in any other place saying, okay, well, we're going to defend our property with lethal force.
Well, definitely not, especially if you're using the Kenosha. Well, first of all, if you're using the Kenosha example, just to be clear on this, the business owner did not ask that militia to be there. And
well, wait. Let's be general. Let's ignore all of the whatever of like, was a call put out? So there were messages that went out. I think at the end, I think he might have denied specifically that he called for Rittenhouse to be there. I couldn't tell if he was doing this for PR reasons or for what, but there were Facebook messages that had gone out for people to like show up and help, blah, blah, blah. But like, regardless, let's assume that had happened, right? You would still have to defend that then if they had put that message out. Or are you saying that like that's like the difference for you, that like, well, you were just opposed to it because nobody put that message out, but if they had put the message out, you would be in favor of it?
I mean, my judgment on the thing with in Kenosha is that I personally think that Rittenhouse had intent to kill.
Wait, hold on. Wait, I'm not talking about Rittenhouse. I don't care about Rittenhouse right now. That's not what I'm just saying that people in that area that wanted to defend their businesses. It feels like using all the arguments that you just laid out, that like you can use a business to provide for the well-being of your family, and that well-being can extend to like health and well-being, that you could reasonably expect that most people that own a business would have the right to defend that business with lethal force.
Sure, I could say the legal right, but I wouldn't necessarily.
We're not talking legality.
Right.
We're only talking morality right now. We have nothing to do with legality. This is a completely immoral argument, right? Because we're talking about like protecting a potential life, right?
In the case that if they do genuinely depend on that business for like if their family is like actually in danger of dying or suffering a severe impairment to quality of life, like extremely severe, like they don't. And there's a real chance that they don't have food coming if that goes down. I don't think that would be realistic for anyone who is wealthy enough to actually be a business owner. Okay,
I would push back there because a lot of people seem to misunderstand. So small business owners are not like ultra wealthy people. Like there are a lot of people that own small business.
I'm a small business owner.
Okay, so then I don't know why you would say that's extremely unlikely for a small business owner that if their business was completely torched, that they would lose the ability to provide for their family.
I'm saying they might lose the ability to provide for their family with that business, but they would still, if you have a large enough network, and if you were to go and create your own business and to be an entrepreneur, it's likely that you are not like that business away from, dying in the street.
Well, should that be the marker then? Like, as long as you're not going to literally be homeless and starving, then you have to you're obligated to watch your property be razed to the ground?
I think you can do whatever you want to protect the property, but I don't think it should go to taking a life, unless there is absolutely no other choice. And only if then the loss of that property would be like, what I was trying to get at earlier, actually, and I think I got interrupted, was like, think of it as somebody like with a dialysis machine. So
sure, but we've moved off of the dialysis machine. So both of us obviously would agree. Anybody, the most stringent, like life isn't worth property, would agree that you could defend your dialysis machine with lethal force, right? Because that's a direct one-to-one. But you had taken it to even a more abstract level without me having to, which I appreciate. The idea that like a business can be used to provide for the general well-being of a family. It doesn't have to be like, this business, I manufacture medicine to keep my kid alive. It could be, this business allows me to make a good enough living that I can afford health insurance for my employees and myself through my job, and that through that health insurance, I get insulin for my child to maintain their blood sugar levels for the diabetes, right?
Yeah. So I would say, again, I think that once it becomes abstracted like that, if I'm talking legally, I'm not going to hold someone legally responsible.
Yeah, to be clear, we're not talking legally at all. I don't care about it. We're not making legal arguments here at all. Only morally, or only what I'm interested in right now.
But at the same time, I don't think they should take. I don't think they should take life. I think they can do other things to defend it, but I don't think taking life is justified. Now, a good example that I might get to is you had mentioned this was very dark in your thing, but you talked about a 4-year-old running out in front of your car. I think that now you kind of changed it a little bit in your video where you said that, like, imagine your family's in the car. If your family's in the car, I think you're correct. Or if your family depends on you to live. But let's assume you're a single guy, no kids, no wife. People will be okay if you passed away. Like, I actually think morally in that situation, you are obligated to commit suicide rather than hit that kid. Now, again, am I going to be super judgmental about somebody who does not make that choice? No, that's a horrible choice to be in. But I think, the need to protect children, particularly innocent children, I think overwhelms and overrides the thing. It's like they did on the Good Place, that the answer to the trolley problem is to throw yourself onto the tracks and derail the actual trolley before it hits.
If this is a moral compulsion that you believe in, do you think that it is always unethical that there are any adults right now that have 2 kidneys that could go to a hospital and have a kidney removed to donate to a child? And
no, I don't think that's always. I think.
How is that not like? Isn't that even like an easier thing to do? I think it's arguably easier to donate a kidney than to commit suicide instead of hitting a kid in a road.
Yeah, it's easier, but also, you've got to think within reason.
Well, but then what's the point of having any moral system if any like moral prescription you're going to have is always going to be unreasonable? Like.
Well, I'm kind of a moral nihilist, though probably not in the way that most people think. Again,
okay, I can't allow you to say that you're a moral nihilist while you're giving me such a harsh pushback on, and then trying to make such a stringent statement that like property is never worth life. Because it seems like at this point you've almost become like a moral realist. Like you've almost become deontological in terms of your defense of like human life and children.
Well, I can see why you would have that impression, but that's actually not where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. And again, like I'm not like into like Stirner or Ayn Rand or Nietzsche. Actually, I kind of like Nietzsche, but when I'm coming from a moral nihilism position, I'm coming from it like as a Buddhist. So I'm much more into the philosophy of like Siddhartha Gautama, Alan Watts, Nichiren Daishonin. So I don't think that morals exist. Like, I don't think morals exist in nature. I think they're things that arise within human minds. And
I agree.
So in that sense, I don't think there's any fixed kind of morality that you have. However, I think morals are also very, very important, and there are certain themes within morality that we have more or less evolved to have as a species because it is helpful for the species in general. So as far as morality goes, if I could be talking about my own individual morality, I could be talking about my feelings about what society's morality should be, or I could be talking about like what I think ultimately like the sort of answer to moral questions is.
I mean, if we're going to appeal to some almost, I don't want to call it biological essentialism, but if we're going to make this appeal to like what's preferential for society or what's most likely to be seen in society, I mean, wouldn't defensive things that you own be like pretty close to fundamentally true there? Like if I saw somebody from another tribe coming to destroy my treehouse or my my cave or whatever, wouldn't I want to like take my club out and beat him to death or whatever? Isn't that pretty normal?
I mean, I think that is an instinct that humans have. However, I also think that that's an instinct that should be resisted for a number of reasons. And this
why though? Yeah, that's what I really want to hear.
Well, I mean, this is a deeper philosophical question, but as a Buddhist, I don't actually believe individuals exist. As in, I believe that like the actual physical person that you're talking to, Brent, I exist. And the physical person that's called Destiny exists. But I don't actually think that there is a fundamental separation between you, me, or really anything else within objective reality. I think all separations and distinctions are they're part of consciousness. So ultimately, and that's why, you'll hear Buddhists say stuff like, if you're hurting someone else, you're hurting yourself. Because ultimately, consciousness and the ego conspires to make you think that you are just little me in this, driving this meat suit. Mm-hmm. But in reality, you're not that. You are the works, essentially, all of existence expressing itself very particularly. You're the macrocosm expressing itself as a microcosm, the universe eyeing. And if you want to understand that more, I highly recommend checking out like the philosophy of Alan Watts, because it's some of the most brilliant stuff I've run into. But that affects my view of morality, because like you asked at the beginning of your moral thing, like what is good, and I agree with you that I don't think that question necessarily has an answer, but my answer to that is that which promotes harmony, compassion, and connection between sentient beings and ultimately leads to human flourishing. I think that's a good I guess secular definition of what I would consider good from a Buddhist standpoint.
Okay, I understand with everything you're saying here, and I don't think I even necessarily disagree with most of what you've said here, but I don't know how that relates back to anything we disagreed on earlier.
Well, I mean, so it relates back to it because we talk about the kid in the car. Okay. And sacrificing yourself to save the kid versus hitting the kid. The kid is you, and you're also in the car.
Yeah, but you would also be the kid in the hospital that needs the kidney.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, like with regard to, I would say, there is a element of what is it? The end of what movie was that? Liam Neeson, Schindler's List, okay, where he's saying, I could have done more. I could have done so much more. This ring, you can always do more. There's always more good that could be done from anybody in the world, but to become obsessed with doing as much good as possible to the point to where you torture yourself, I think is a bad call overall. And maybe that's a little in tension with the particular.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, because Singer and people that deal with utilitarianism have like different things that they talk about, or similar things that they talk about with this. You can't be like a perfect good machine constantly. That nobody could live that way. But like if that was the case, because now it seems like you're giving me definitions that are way more flexible with what you would consider like morally acceptable than what I would consider morally acceptable. It feels like you should be even more on board with the idea that somebody could kill somebody that was trying to like steal property from them. Because like you might not act in a perfect way necessarily all the time, but we wouldn't expect people to make these sacrifices all the time, that if somebody was coming after their home or business, that they should just sacrifice and let the other person take it. Like it seems like you're making even stronger arguments in that direction for people being allowed to defend their property with lethal force.
I mean, again, I would say that I'm not in those situations, and I don't know how I would react.
Well, but we want to be able to make moral statements about those people, right?
The point with like defending your property with lethal force, like the reason you're able to defend your property with lethal force is not that it is your property; it's that you don't know what this other person is going to do. So like with your, and I honestly, I was hoping to save this for the modern day debate, but like the stick of gum thing. And, I think what's interesting, since we're getting this out now, maybe we can get even deeper into it. But, I don't think that you're justified in killing someone if they want to attack you and their only goal is to attack you and to steal a stick of gum.
So real quick, okay, so because I'm trying to focus more on rhetoric in 2021, I'm not comfortable with you exploring the most extreme end of my hypothetical, the most extreme hypothetical. Normally, I'm fine exploring hypotheticals. I think it's a good way to test moral systems. But I'm uncomfortable doing that when it feels like you're incredibly hesitant to give me almost any answer regarding very real world applications of morality. So, for instance, when it comes to defending property, when you're willing to say something like, "Well, I've never been in this situation, so I can't ask." Now, I want to talk to you about murdering somebody over a stick of gum. That feels like an unfair, I'll engage with any hypothetical you want, because hypotheticals are very interesting to me. Yeah. But when you're incredibly unwilling to engage with like real world moral questions, now it feels like the ground is very uneven, and I'm going to come away from the discussion looking really bad because I'm willing to entertain the most absurd hypothetical in my system, whereas you haven't even necessarily given me a system yet to attack.
Yeah. Again, so what I'm talking about with regard to the stick of gum thing, and I was actually just about to get to it, I think that in the instance that we put that into the real world, and someone is attacking you and you don't know why they're attacking you, you don't know what they're going to do, in their mind, they want all they want is a stick of gum for some ridiculous reason. I can see why someone would be justified. I'm not sure I'd say it would be entirely moral, but I'm not going to be too judgmental about them making the call to use lethal force against an attack because they don't know. There's that instance of ambiguity. But if we had perfect knowledge of the system and you knew that the person only wanted a piece of gum, I would say it would be immoral to not just give them that piece of gum. Because again, the gum is not important, but a person's life absolutely is. It's to give them the gum and then figure out why they're that freaking crazy for gum, because that person is probably very dangerous and needs therapy or something.
Do you think that everybody's life has the exact same amount of value?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. As in, and I think not only will I say that everyone's life has the exact same amount of value, I would say that everyone's life has an infinite amount of value.
If everybody's life has the same amount of value, if one person steps into a bar to murder two people, why aren't the two people obligated to give their life to that one man? If the only way they can defend themselves is with lethal force, wouldn't the moral decision there be, if our lives are all equal the same and it's 1v2, that the two should always step down and let the one?
I mean, there's actually like stuff in the sutras about this exact problem. The issue here, and again, this gets more back to Buddhism.
Oh my God, hold on, real quick. I'm sorry, I stated this backwards. I mean, if two people are going to kill one person, should the one person always allow the two people to kill him, since there's two of them and only one other person? I stated this backwards.
No,
I think you understood the concept.
And I think we can't help but be partisan to ourselves and our own lives.
No, wait. I'm just asking for moral principles, not like how would you react to the situation? Because so what I'm doing here is you've given me a statement that all moral lives are equivalent in value, or that all lives are morally equivalent in value. I don't believe that personally. I don't think that's true. I think there are things that you can do that might cause you to lose value from your life. So for instance, threatening the life of another person, I think can change the value of your life. But you are taking the stronger stance that all lives are equivalent in value. So I'm asking, if it's a 2-on-1 situation, two aggressors versus one innocent person, should the innocent person be allowed to defend themselves with lethal force, or are they compelled to submit themselves to the other two people, since those people arguably have twice as much value as they do? And then what I'm looking for...
I'd say neither, actually.
Well, what is the solution then?
Well, this is ultimately a wash. Again, now keep in mind...
Wait, how's it a wash? It's 2-on-1. How's it a wash? There's 2 times the value on one end than the other. Because again, I don't think individuals actually exist. This would be like 2 cells in a body attacking 1 cell in a body. Well, okay, you do believe that you can't say that you don't believe 2 individuals exist, but then grant like special moral consideration on individuals. Clearly, you recognize that there is some ontology, there is some kind of being, related to an individual. So you can't say they don't exist in some cases, but then in other cases say property is worth more, or life is always worth more than property. Because
I'm not saying they don't exist in some cases and not in others. It's you exist. It's more like there's if we use the term self, and this is getting into like some really like high level philosophy and spirituality and stuff, and it was really interesting too, because when you were talking about kind of like a perfect moral system that you were defaulting to, it actually kind of reminded me of like a lot of people's arguments towards God or ultimate reality or whatever.
Okay, to be clear, I don't think that perfect moral, like the most like jerked himself off for a perfect moral system in the history of the world was Kant, who was very much not religious. I mean, I don't know if I would agree with that, but I understand what you're saying. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think when you get to a certain level of, I guess, because of how philosophy works and because of how human brains work, when you get to a certain level of philosophy, like you're ultimately asking questions about God, whether you're an atheist or not, in my opinion.
Well, sure. Okay, regardless of that, so backing up on all of that, I'm just saying that like you recognize that even if you think everything flows into itself, or you think that things aren't distinct objects, you are still recognizing a distinction between individuals and non-individuals, because you're willing to make statements relating to the value of a life versus property, right?
Absolutely. I'm willing to make, I would say it's a subjective distinction, but it's an important one.
Sure. So then my question is, so very simply, of earlier, and if you want to, and I'm not trying to trap you, so if you want to amend like an earlier statement, because I'm asking you a more particular question and you feel like your earlier statement missed the way to phrase that, then you can always reframe something earlier. I'm not trying to like trap you or whatever. But earlier you told me that you so you made it as though all lives were equivalent in value. And so my only question is if two lives are aggressing on one life, I'm asking why the one life morally isn't compelled to give their life to the two aggressors, as the two aggressors will have more value than the individual. That's what I don't understand. So in my system, I don't say that all lives are worth the same. So I could easily say like, oh yeah, well, if it's two people then they're aggressing, the fact that they're aggressing on another life, in that situation would make them worth less than the person that's being aggressed on, is what I would say. So, yeah. But it seems like you say that all lives are equivalent, so you're not comfortable making that. So I'm curious how you would solve that, because I feel like intuitively, I don't think you're ever going to say or admit the reasonable conclusion of that logic, which is, well, one innocent individual should always submit himself to two aggressive individuals. I don't think that intuitively you're going to say that. That feels really wrong. So I'm curious how you justify that one individual fighting back with lethal force.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'll tell you is precedent. You're not simply like acting as yourself in relation. Your death is going to ripple through your community, and also a society where people as a general rule submit themselves to being attacked and killed by other more powerful people is going to eventually build a society that is very brutal.
Okay, I don't disagree with you. This is literally verbatim my argument against that's the stick of gum argument, right? Like, because this is what I say is because people will say like, oh, well, somebody's just trying to steal a stick of gum from you. Like, is that really that big of a deal? Well, then my argument is that if we're going to take it to that absurd, I'm going to argue that you've built a society where strong people are able to steal whatever they can get away with from weaker people, because that person is always going to be morally compelled to give up that property to the stronger person.
Sure, but also what I'm going to point out, and I will agree with you on there, and there is a precedent issue that I hadn't thought of that before. But I also don't think people are necessarily static. And in the case of, if we take this a little out of the realm of abstraction, we go to political riots and stuff. I think what's important is to figure out why these people have been driven to the point where they think it's a good idea to riot. Yeah,
of course, which I don't disagree with. But I don't think that you are on, like, I don't think that it's on you to make that determination. There are people who you can be sympathetic to child molesters, right? There are people that that grow. Is it the John Wayne Gacy or whatever? I don't remember his name, but like John this guy he was abused, and this is true of a lot of like child predators. They were abused their entire lives. They were beaten. They were sexually molested. Blah 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 blah. That like when you hear their story, it's like, okay, sure, we can understand how a person can be driven to this, but you would never talk to a victim and say, well, listen, like, don't you understand that the reason why he did this was because of all of his like past things that happened in his life? You would never compel an individual to suffer a person's history, right? You would say like, well, sure,
that would be cruel. That would hurt the person that I'm talking to senselessly, because they've been put in a position where they can't be objective about it because of the nature of the crime against them.
Which is what I would say to people that are suffering like the destruction of a business at the hands of a rioter.
I mean, they can't be nonpartisan with regard to that, but I don't think that I don't think that enables them to take that person's life, and I don't think, for instance, the death penalty should be applied to John Wayne Gacy.
Wait, but why wouldn't it take a person who's trying to defend their stuff? Why wouldn't they have the right to defend that with lethal intent, though? Why would they be forced to submit? Why are you placing the onus on them to make some hyper-rational decision?
You got a false dichotomy here that you're assuming, one, the only way to defend that property is with lethal force, and also two, the best way to defend that property is with lethal force. And except in very, very specific circumstances, I just don't think that either of those things is necessarily true.
Sure, and that might not always be necessarily true, but for the sake of this discussion, right, we're both moving past that. Obviously, there are going to be cases, if there's like a 14-year-old, 80-pound girl that's trying to break into like The Rock's house, he probably doesn't need to take a rifle out and assassinate her, right? Like he can probably just pick her up and toss her out, of course. But we can also acknowledge that there are cases where times are very tense, where a situation can be very tense, where a person doesn't know if they're going to get murdered if they step outside their business. So for instance, the LA riots, the Tulsa race massacres, or the Tulsa massacre, Kristallnacht in Germany with the Jews, like you don't always know 100% what's going to happen. And my issue with saying that like, oh, well, you have to exhaust all other options first, I think sometimes that's reasonable. So for instance, if I hear something in my backyard and I look outside my window and I see like two teens enter like a shed or whatever, I probably have some like negotiating ability here if they know they've been caught. But if I'm in the middle of a riot where, you know, the street's on fire, there's crowds moving up and down the street, and I'm sitting on top of my building, I don't know if I would compel an individual to say like, okay, hey, listen, go out and chat with them and hope for the best, because that person might subject themselves, or I'm asking that person to subject themselves to potentially great physical and bodily harm, maybe even death, in order to try to negotiate with somebody else that's being an aggressor. That's my problem with that take.
Yeah, I mean, my issue with the take is I think that would potentially be a better solution than lethal force, even if lethal force was on it. And also, you know, you this goes into human psychology, and you'll notice like people tend to pay more attention to that which threatens them as opposed to that which could benefit them in general. You know, like psychological studies with regard to like, this is different, but like grocery bags. They tested if they would give someone like 5 extra cents, like a 5-cent credit, if they brought their own grocery bags to the grocery store, and very few people responded to it. But then they said, okay, we're going to charge you a 5-cent tax. And suddenly everybody was on board with bringing their own groceries. Because,
yeah, I think in economics it's called like loss aversion, that like the potential gains are looked at a lot differently than potential losses, even if the amounts are the same. People view them in way different manners. Yeah, I'm familiar with this.
Absolutely. And similarly, like, you know, even in comics, like one of the things that's incredible about like visual color design is the human eye is drawn to 2 things: empty white space and also the color red, because it's our lizard brain reacting to like blood. Mm-hmm. So people are, when it comes to violence and potential violence, people tend to place a lot more I guess psychological emphasis on it, and it leads to, if people are not diverting to peacefulness, if you don't control yourself, you can make a mistake and think that you are in a lot more danger than you otherwise would be in, and wind up taking someone's life when you don't have to take it.
Sure, but is the onus on the victim at that particular point to figure it out? So like, let's say, for instance, I'm curious if you'd make the same moral compulsion. Let's say that there's a person, let's say that there's a lady and she's in the bathroom in a bar, and let's say that a guy breaks in, and let's say that this guy's been making like sexually suggestive or threatening comments against her like all night, and she thinks that this guy is coming in to rape her, and this guy is like 100 pounds heavier than her, and if he breaks into the stall, then she's fucked or whatever. Let's say that she has a gun on her. Does she have the right to defend herself, or should she try to negotiate with him and hope that he sees like, well, hold on, like, I don't think you want to do this, or I don't think this is right, or whatever, like open the stall door and have like a face-to-face conversation with him?
Yeah, I think that in that instance, the thing to do is, rather than immediately shoot, you inform him you've got a gun, and maybe you show it to him, you know, or you fire off a warning shot or something.
Sure, but like, let's say that obviously we're moving forward in the hypothetical. Say it doesn't work. I'm not interested in a guy that responds to a warning shot. Obviously, we'd say, okay, good, he went away. But in a guy that wants to commit sexual assault against a woman, and he wants to do this, and her only defense at this point is lethal defense because she can't fight him off. Does she have a right to do that, or is taking his life in exchange for some bodily harm to her, is that like an immoral action? Would you say she shouldn't do that? She should be compelled to a higher standard.
Really, you know, that's a really compelling point. And I'll tell you what, I haven't, probably because I'm a dude and I don't have to worry about rape, like I haven't really thought of that. I would say that she is justified in doing that, though I think it's less because of the assault itself and more because she doesn't know what he's going to do in addition to the assault.
Let's say she knew 1,000,000%. Let's say it was a pacifist, and he tells her, I'm never going to kill another human being. I won't do it. I won't kill you. I just want to sexually assault you.
Wait. So we've got a pacifist who's what? He's like on bath salts or something, and he's like, I'm a pacifist, but I love to attack and rape people. That's
so the majority of sexual assault. So to bring this back to the real world, the vast majority of sexual assault does not end in like a murder. It's incredibly rare that happens. It's very, very rare. So I would argue that, as ridiculous as analogy sounds, I'm only making it sound this ridiculous because you're saying like, well, let's say that she knew the guy wasn't going to kill her. But the vast majority of sexual assault doesn't end in murder. So I would say that this, as silly as this analogy sounds, is way more close to reality than the idea of somebody like rape murdering somebody.
Well, I mean, again, what I would say with regard to an assault, and I'm not going to tell, women can probably answer that because I am not equipped to really understand what it's like to be raped or to be constantly afraid of rape in the way that a lot of women are. So I don't really think I have a lot of ethos to weigh in on exactly where the line is there. Because again, we were talking earlier about property versus life.
Sure, and I don't.
Now we've got into life versus a human body.
Sure, so I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying here. But then I would also wonder why in the same breath you're so quick to condemn like business owners that would defend their property when you don't know the exact situation of those business owners then.
I'm not quick to condemn business owners for defending their property. I'm quick to condemn people who jump at the chance to, a good example is like those militias you saw in Texas that show up and like, we're going to get our guns and shoot people when they try to come and loot our business.
Sure. Would you jump if a group of people sprung up with guns and arms to defend women from being raped?
I mean, if they are actually defending women from being raped, that I would consider that a heroic act.
Well, so if these people were actually defending businesses from being destroyed or attempting to,
that would be much more. I would say it depends on what exactly the business does. Like if it's a hospital, that's one thing. If it's like a freaking record store, you probably shouldn't kill someone to defend your record store.
Well, it doesn't really matter what the business is, right? It just matters if somebody is drawing the majority of the sustenance for themselves and their family from it, right?
Well, no, I think it also matters like what the physical stuff is, how easily it can be replaced, if you have insurance. Like imagine, say you are a gas station owner or something and there's a riot and you have insurance on your place and you know that you'll be covered. If you go out and you kill somebody to defend that.
Well, but so we know that we're both American, I think, right? You're American? We know that insurance doesn't work that way in the United States. And we actually saw as much in the Minneapolis riots that most of those business owners that lost their business, they weren't compensated completely for it.
But even if it doesn't work that way, the point is that the ability to use lethal force in defense of property derives directly from that property's effect on your life, and you have a weaker claim the less necessary that property is for the maintenance of your life. So,
well, of course, but I agree with that. But that's the argument you said earlier. But like, let's say one person owns a hospital, but they own like 30 hospitals, and then let's say one person owns a record store and they own only one record store. That's literally the entirety of their like life savings, and that's how they provide for their family. Then one person probably has a stronger claim to defend their record store than another would to defend the hospital, right?
Oh, I completely disagree. And I'll tell you why, because the 30 hospitals, that has more life-saving ability. So I would actually say the person that owns 30 hospitals has more has a stronger moral claim defending that hospital than the person with the one record store.
Even if the person with the one record store won't be able to provide for their family anymore, and the other person with the hospital will be able to replace it very quickly, or?
Sure, because how many freaking people depend on a hospital to live? Like how many does like 5 minutes of going to a further away hospital mean for somebody like suffering from a heart attack or liver failure? Like,
what if it's just like a small clinic where you go in and get prescriptions or whatever, I guess?
Okay, so that's closer to the record store. So
it just seems weird. It sucks that like people can defend their business, but only if it's like a socially necessary business. Otherwise, you just kind of have to watch it like die. I guess that seems unsatisfying.
The issue again, my issue again is not so much socially necessary, because I would see a business like a record store or something that provides art or culture as socially necessary. It's the difference between it being directly related to keeping people alive. So I would say if you own like 300 clinics and one clinic is going to get totally wrecked and there's not a realistic chance that someone will die or, lose a foot or something as a result of that clinic not being there for them, I would say the record store owner has a greater claim on defending their property with lethal force.
Okay, going back to the 2-on-1 example, how do you reconcile this? And two people want to attack one person. Why should the one person be allowed to defend his life with lethal force if the two people have twice as much value of life as him?
It's not twice as much value, because remember I said life has infinite value. So 2 times infinity it's just infinity.
Well, okay, then I didn't take you at your word for that. I don't think you would agree that life has infinite value, though. No.
No, I think it definitely has infinite value.
Okay, let's say that I could kill one person to make every other person on the planet incredibly wealthy. Do you think that that one person's life would be a worthwhile exchange?
Certainly not.
Okay. All right, well, I think we've kind of
a big point of contention between the two of us.
Sure. All right, well, I think we've kind of, I mean, if you wanted to do like a modern day debate show, we should probably stop here because we're kind of exhausting that topic.
This is fun. Well, there's some other stuff we could talk about too. I've been wanting to do a debate on determinism. It was going to be with rationality rules, but so maybe we can do something with that, or we could continue it. But yeah, this has been really cool, Destiny. I gotta say, I was nervous to come on, both because I gotta say, I think you are an incredible rhetorician, and I was really impressed in your takedown of like Alsop and Stryker, particularly because I had debated Stryker beforehand, and it turned into like a shouting match. So you and Vosh, that was a beautiful thing to see. So yeah, I was actually a little hesitant to come on just because of that, and because of like how emotionally, I don't know about emotionally, but strongly you had responded to the critique of the debate. But dude, this has been really cool. You're kind of a cool guy.
All right, well, hey, listen, I appreciate the conversation, my dude.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, stay safe, be careful. I kind of wish you guys talked about logical extremes. I agree with you for the most part when it comes to defensive property, but I still think value plays a factor. Yeah, we can get the... Honestly, what the whole I didn't want to get bogged down in boring shit, but the whole conversation should have actually been about, I don't know if you would say epistemic norms, like the idea that you can have like systems that have inconsistent logics or systems that have inherent contradictions is ridiculous. I should have just started there. I'm pretty sure that math, while there might be some unsolved questions, or you might run into a strange paradox or something, or an apparent paradox, Zeno's quote-unquote paradox, the one of getting closer to the wall or whatever. Like you might have. I don't think that math people say like, oh yeah, well you know, like when you get really into it, math is just very rational, you know, LOL. Like I don't think that that's at all the case, but. Was it just me, or did he simultaneously not have a moral system at all, but also have every moral system at the same time? Well, I think that there, like I said, this is why I asked, this is why even Zeno's paradox, that's why I say apparent paradox, right? That's why I try to ask people questions to figure out what it is they really believe, because I think there is a moral system there. You're just trying to figure out what they're appealing to at some fundamental level. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed. Is Dan actually dead? Dan is gone, guys. Stop talking about him. We don't talk about Dan anymore.
The only place Dan exists is in my TTS.